5 years after I ran, the Mafia boss looked at me and said, "Hello, wife." He didn't knock. He never knocked. The door to the 32nd floor conference room swung open like he owned the building, because he did, as of 48 hours ago. And every head in the room turned except hers. Evelyn kept her eyes on the stack of acquisition folders in front of her, fingers pressed flat against the manila edge, willing herself invisible the way she had practiced for 5 years. She heard the footsteps, measured, unhurried, the kind of footsteps that had never needed to rush a single day in their life. Then the room went quiet, in that particular way rooms go quiet when something dangerous walks in. She looked up, and the world she had spent 5 years building from nothing collapsed in the space of one breath. Damien Voss stood 12 feet away, and his eyes were already on her, not scanning the room, not reviewing the staff, already on her, like he had known exactly where she would be standing before the door opened. His expression didn't change. That was the part that broke something open in her chest. No shock, no confusion, just those dark, unreadable eyes settling on her face with the quiet patience of a man who had simply been waiting for a confirmation he already expected. The folders slipped from her fingers. He watched them fall. "Hello," Damien said, and his voice was the same. God, it was the same, low and unhurried, carrying across the silence without effort. He tilted his head by precisely 1 degree. "Wife." If you've ever had a moment where everything you built to keep yourself safe comes apart in a single second, subscribe to this channel, hit that like button, and drop your city and country in the comments below. I want to know how far this story has traveled. Because what happens next to Evelyn and Damien, not one person in that room was ready for it, and neither were they. The morning had started the way all her mornings started now. 5:45 alarm off before it could ring. Coffee made in the dark because she had never been able to sleep past the hour, when the city was still quiet enough to feel safe. She stood at the kitchen window of her apartment, small, deliberately small, nothing that would draw attention, and watched the street below the way a person watches something they don't fully trust. Habit. Pure habit. The same habit that had kept her alive and anonymous in this city for 2 years. Her name, in this life, was Ellen Marsh. Administrative Coordinator, Hartwell Capital Group, 32nd floor. Good at her job, quiet, nobody's business. She wore her hair differently now, shorter and darker, and she had traded the careful dresses she used to own for the kind of sensible office clothes that made a person look like furniture. She had worked very hard to look like furniture. She had references from a consulting firm in Portland that didn't technically exist anymore, but nobody had ever checked closely enough to notice. She made her coffee. She ate half a piece of toast. She put on her coat. She did not check the news. She had not checked the news in 5 years because the news had a way of containing his name, and his name did the same thing to her nervous system every time that it had always done. Sent a kind of cold electricity down through her sternum that she could never quite decide was fear or something she refused to name. She took the subway. She sat in the middle of the car, not the end. She got off 1 stop early and walked the remaining 6 blocks because she liked knowing the exits on every street she moved through. These were not the behaviors of a woman who was fine. She knew that. She had made a kind of peace with it. The office was already half full when she arrived at 8:15. She said good morning to 2 people whose names she knew and 3 people whose names she was careful not to learn. She made a second cup of coffee in the break room because the first one had been too small. She pulled up her calendar. The calendar had a note at the top that someone from corporate had placed there the previous afternoon. New ownership orientation, mandatory attendance, conference room B, 10 a.m. She read it. She didn't think much about it. Companies got acquired. People came through for orientations. You sat in the back row. You nodded at the appropriate moments. You did not volunteer information about yourself. And then it was over and you went back to work. She went back to her desk. She answered 4 emails. She approved 3 expense reports. At 9:58, she gathered her notebook and walked to conference room B. Chad. There were maybe 25 people in the room when she arrived. Administrative staff, mid-level managers, 2 people from legal who always looked faintly miserable. Evelyn took a seat in the second-to-last row, which was neither the very back, conspicuous in its own way, nor the front, where people looked at you. She set her notebook on the table and uncapped her pen. She noticed Marcus, the office manager, hovering near the door with an expression she didn't recognize on him. Tight, careful, like a man bracing for weather he'd checked and still didn't fully believe. Somebody important? The woman next to her murmured. Priya from accounts. Nice enough. Guess we'll see, Evelyn said. The door opened. She was looking at her notebook. She heard the footsteps, and something in her body registered them before her mind did. A kind of ancient cellular awareness that lifted the hairs on the back of her arms. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself she was doing that thing she sometimes did, reading threat into ordinary sound. Then the room went quiet in that particular way, and she looked up, and it was not nothing. It was Damien. 5 years had done something to him that she hadn't expected. She had expected him to look the same, because in her memory he was fixed. The way people who have enormous power over you tend to be fixed, unchanging, permanent as geography. But he was not the same. There were sharper lines around his eyes. The way he carried himself had become something even more economical, more contained, like a man who had stopped using any movement that wasn't necessary. He was wearing a dark suit without a tie, his collar open by one button, and he looked like he had never in his life been uncertain about a single thing. He looked like a man who had always been going to walk through this exact door. His security had fanned out behind him without a word. She counted 3 before she stopped because counting made it too real. Marcus was saying something near the door, some standard orientation welcome, and Damien wasn't listening. His gaze moved through the room with that professional, sweeping patience she remembered, cataloging, assessing, and then it arrived at her face and it stopped. It stopped completely. Her pen was in her hand and she was not moving. She could feel her own heartbeat in her throat. His expression didn't change. She had always hated that about him, the way his face made decisions independently of what was actually happening inside it, the way you could never tell, not really, not unless he wanted you to. He looked at her for 3 full seconds with the face of a man checking something off a list he already knew by heart. Then, hello, wife. Quiet. Almost conversational. The word landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. She stood up. She was not entirely sure why she stood up. Instinct, probably, the same instinct that had gotten her out of a lot of bad rooms. But the moment she was on her feet, she realized it had been the wrong move because now she was standing and he was already walking toward her, unhurried, the people between them parting without being asked. I think, she said, and was surprised by how steady her own voice came out. There's been a mistake. Has there? Not a question. He stopped 2 feet from her. Up close he smelled the same, something clean and faintly expensive that she had spent considerable effort not thinking about. And his eyes were doing that thing where they took inventory without blinking. Ellen Marsh. He said the name the way you say a word in a foreign language when you know exactly what it means, and find it slightly amusing that someone tried to pass it off as something else. That's my name, she said. It's one of them. He glanced down at the notebook in her hand, then back up. You changed your hair. She stopped. There was nothing to say to that. She was very aware of 24 people in the room who had stopped breathing. Mr. Voss, she said carefully, I don't know what you think. I think, he said, with that precise, measured quiet, that you and I have a great deal to discuss, and I think this isn't the room for it. He let a pause settle. Unless you'd like your colleagues to hear the conversation. Her jaw tightened. He watched it tighten. Something moved behind his eyes. Not satisfaction, exactly. More like recognition. There's a car outside, he said. When you're ready. He turned and walked back toward the door as if the matter were already resolved, because in his experience, and she remembered this with absolute clarity, matters generally were resolved the moment Damien Voss decided they were. She stood at her chair for 4 seconds. Then she picked up her coat. The car was black and unremarkable in the way that expensive things sometimes make themselves unremarkable, and the partition between the front and back seats was already raised when she got in. Damien was sitting on the far side, jacket still on, one arm resting along the window's edge. He was looking out at the street. She sat as far from him as the seat allowed. Neither of them spoke for almost 2 minutes. The car moved through downtown traffic with the unhurried confidence of a vehicle whose driver knew which streets to take to avoid every light. You're not going to ask me how I found you, he said finally, still looking at the window. I know how you found me, she said. You bought the company. I bought the company 6 weeks ago. He turned his head then, and she met his eyes because she had decided somewhere in the elevator down from the 32nd floor that looking away was the one thing she absolutely could not afford. I've known where you were for 3 weeks. Her stomach dropped an inch. Then why? I wanted to see what you'd do. A pause. Whether you'd run. She had thought about it. God, she had thought about it. The moment she'd seen the acquisition notice in the company-wide email, something at the base of her skull had lit up like a warning signal, and she had spent an entire evening going through exit scenarios in her head, mentally packing the go bag she still kept under her bed. She had talked herself out of it. She had told herself she was being paranoid, that Damien Voss acquired companies all across the country, that the odds were nothing. She hadn't run. I didn't run, she said. No, he agreed, and there was something in his tone she couldn't parse. You didn't. The car stopped at a red light. Outside, people moved across a crosswalk with their coats and their coffees and their ordinary lives, and Evelyn looked at them and thought about all the mornings she had made herself ordinary, and how fragile it turned out that ordinary had been all along. Where are we going? She asked. Somewhere we can talk. I'm not going anywhere without knowing where... Evelyn. Just her name. Her real name, spoken quietly, and the sound of it after 5 years of not hearing it from anyone who knew it was real, hit her somewhere she hadn't prepared for. He wasn't looking at the window anymore. He was looking at her directly, and his voice had shifted to something that wasn't cold exactly, but it was precise in the way that sometimes felt colder than cold. You've been hiding from something. I'm not it. She opened her mouth, closed it. His eyes didn't move from her face. You've been hiding from something, he said again, slower. And whatever it is, it's followed you here. I had you under observation for 3 weeks. A beat. You have a tail. 2 men, rotating shifts. They're not mine. The air went out of her lungs. She had been careful. She had been so careful. How long? She managed. At minimum since you arrived in this city. He held her gaze. Possibly longer. She turned and looked out the back window of the car and saw nothing. Which meant nothing, because the people who had been looking for her for 5 years were not the kind of people who stood in obvious places. Her hands, in her lap, were very still. She had learned to keep her hands still when the fear came because moving them made the fear real. One dinner, Damien said. That's all I'm asking. You eat, I listen, and then you can make whatever decision you want to make. She turned back to him. You're asking, she said. Since when do you ask? Something shifted in his expression. The smallest possible shift, something that on a different man's face might have been acknowledgement. Since about 4 minutes ago, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she faced forward in her seat and said nothing more, and the car moved on through the city, carrying both of them towards something that had been unfinished for 5 years and was now, whether either of them was ready or not, going to be finished. Outside the windows, the city kept moving. Ordinary and oblivious and entirely unaware that somewhere in its streets, 2 people who had spent half a decade running from each other and from everything else were finally, irrevocably, running out of room. The restaurant Damien chose was the kind of place that didn't have a sign outside. You either knew where it was or you didn't eat there, and the people who knew where it was were not the kind of people who discussed it in mixed company. Evelyn had been in rooms like this before, the private dining rooms of men who conducted business that couldn't survive daylight, and the particular quality of the silence inside, the way sound seemed to stop at the walls, brought back a physical memory she had spent years pressing flat. She walked in ahead of him because he held the door, and she refused to examine what that meant. The maitre d', if that was even the right word for a man built like a former soldier in an expensive suit, led them to a corner table without being asked. The room had 4 other tables, all empty. She didn't think that was an accident. She sat. She put her bag on the chair beside her instead of the floor because the floor was an exit option and the chair was not. Old habit. The kind of habit that had nothing to do with etiquette. Damien sat across from her and said nothing while the man poured water into 2 glasses and disappeared. The silence between them was not comfortable, but it wasn't aggressive either. It was something more complicated. The silence of 2 people who had once shared a bed for 3 nights and then spent 5 years not speaking, which created a specific kind of atmospheric pressure that had no polite name. You're not going to eat anything, he said. I might. You're sitting with your back to the wall and you've checked the kitchen entrance twice since we sat down. He picked up the menu with the unhurried manner of a man who already knew what he wanted. You're not going to eat. She put her hands in her lap. You've been watching me for 3 weeks. You probably know what I order for lunch. Turkey on wheat, no mayo, coffee, black, 1 sugar. He set the menu down. You eat at your desk more often than not. You leave the building twice a day. Once for lunch, once at 3, 4 blocks north, same route. You vary your morning arrival time by up to 40 minutes, but your departure is always within a 10-minute window of 6:15. She stared at him. I had people watching the men who were watching you, he said, without particular emphasis, as though this were an ordinary thing to say. It's easier to understand a surveillance pattern from the outside. She stopped, took a breath. That's a significant amount of effort for a woman you haven't spoken to in 5 years. Yes. He met her eyes. It is. She didn't know what to do with that, so she picked up her own menu and looked at it without reading a word. A waiter came and went. Damien ordered. She ordered something she immediately forgot, because the part of her brain responsible for food had been fully overridden by the part responsible for threat assessment, and the two did not coexist well. When they were alone again, he set his forearms on the table and looked at her with that quality of attention she remembered. Total, unflinching, the kind that made most people start talking just to fill the space it created. She had learned, in a previous life, not to fill silence on someone else's terms. You said you wanted to talk, she said. I said I'd listen. Then listen. She put the menu down. I left. It was my choice. You're not owed an explanation. Something moved in his jaw. Not much. The faintest tightening along the muscle beneath his ear. She had forgotten how much happened on his face in the spaces between expressions. I'm not here for an explanation, he said. Then what are you here for? I told you. Someone's been following you. A pause. For at least 2 years. Possibly longer. Professional surveillance, rotating personnel. Minimum of 4 individuals on a standard shift pattern. Equipment that doesn't come from any commercial vendor. He let that settle. These are not people you called the wrong number on. She said nothing. Her hands were still in her lap. Evelyn. Don't. The word came out sharper than she intended. She saw him register it. The slight stillness, the recalibration. Don't use that name here. There's no one in this room but us. There's never no one. She looked at the wall behind him. Brick and art and very good lighting that made everything look warmer and safer than it was. You don't know what you're involved in. I know more than you think. His voice stayed level. I know the men watching you have been flagged in connection with a syndicate operating out of 3 countries across 2 continents. I know they've been running long-duration surveillance operations for at least a decade. I know... He stopped. Something crossed his face that she couldn't name. I know they started watching you before you came to this city, which means whatever you're running from, you never actually got far enough away. The water glass in front of her had a small bead of condensation running down the side. She watched it reach the base. I'm not running, she said. You have a go bag under your bed with 4 different sets of identification and approximately $11,000 in mixed currency. He said it quietly. Factually. Like reading off a grocery list. You've been running for 5 years. You're just very good at running in place. She looked at him then, fully, directly, the way she'd been avoiding since the car. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were not. His eyes had always been the one part of him that didn't entirely comply with the rest of his presentation. There was something in them now that she recognized but could not afford to respond to. How do you know about the bag? She said. Because if our positions were reversed, I'd have one too. A beat. And because my people are thorough. Your people went through my apartment. My people observed your apartment. His jaw was doing that thing again. There's a difference. Is there? Yes. Flat. Definitive. Then, after a pause, I didn't have them go inside. She studied his face. Why not? He looked at her for 3 seconds without answering. Then, because some lines are yours to decide when to cross. She didn't expect that. She had prepared herself for versions of Damien she remembered. The cold authority, the controlled aggression, the particular brand of patience that always felt more like a coiled thing than actual patience. She had not prepared for whatever this was. It sat wrong in her mental architecture of him, and she didn't trust things that sat wrong. You said something followed me here, she said, rerouting. Back to facts. Facts were safer. Define here. This city or this restaurant? He said it without changing his expression, and she felt it go through her like cold water. We were followed from the office. 3 vehicles, staggered. They broke off 2 blocks out, which tells me they know this location and didn't need to follow us inside to know where we'd be. Her hands tightened in her lap. That's not possible, she said. I didn't know we were coming here until I made the reservation from the car. His eyes didn't move from her face, which means they have my communications. The air in the room felt different suddenly, closer. Or mine, she said very quietly. Or yours. A pause. Yes. She pushed back from the table half an inch, just enough, just a fraction. And he noticed, and she watched him decide not to comment on it. I need you to tell me what's happening, he said. Not because you owe me, not because of the marriage, because there are professional surveillance operatives in the street outside this building and I don't like operating blind. You shouldn't be involved. I am involved. The moment I bought the company, I became involved. Something shifted in his voice. Not harder exactly, more direct. And I would have been involved regardless. You know that. She looked at the table. Evelyn. Quieter now. Who's following you? She picked up the water glass. Set it down. Picked it back up again, registered that she was fidgeting, and forced her hand flat against the tablecloth. 5 years ago, she started, and then stopped because starting was always the part that cost the most. He waited. He was very good at waiting. She had forgotten that too. 5 years ago, I didn't leave because I wanted to, she said. I left because I had to, and I can't. Her voice went careful, controlled. I can't explain all of it right now, not here, not with. She glanced toward the window. There are things you don't know about me, about who I was before we met. And if I tell you, it changes things for you in ways that you can't undo. Things are already changed, he said, not like this. Then tell me the part you can tell me. She looked at him. He looked back. Outside, on a street she couldn't see, people who had been hunting her for 5 years sat in cars and waited with the patient professionalism of individuals who had been paid a great deal of money to be thorough. There's a man, she said finally. I don't know his name. I've never known his name. I only know what he's been called. He's been looking for me since before I met you, before I had the name you know me by. She paused. Measured the next words carefully the way you'd measure a step on ice. He believes I belong to him. Not in any way that makes emotional sense. More like a debt, a property arrangement. Damien's eyes narrowed by a degree. What kind of arrangement? The kind that was made before I was old enough to have any say in it. She kept her voice flat and even. The kind that men like my father made when they wanted something and had a daughter available as currency. The silence after that had a different texture. Damien's forearms were still on the table. He hadn't moved. But something had changed in the quality of his stillness. It had become more deliberate, the way stillness becomes deliberate when a person is managing a response they haven't decided to express yet. Your father, he said, is not someone you know. A beat. Or someone you want to know. Is he the one who's been, no, flat, quick? My father is not a factor I need to worry about. A pause she hadn't planned. For reasons I won't discuss right now. Damien studied her face with that cataloging attention, and she knew he was filing the things she wasn't saying alongside the things she was, constructing the fuller picture from the negative space. He had always been good at that. It had attracted her once. It terrified her now. This man who's looking for you, he said. The one with the claim. He's the one running the surveillance. I believe so, yes. And he's been looking for 5 years. At least 5 years, she exhaled. Probably longer. Which means he's either very motivated or very well resourced. Both, she said. He's very much both. Damien leaned back in his chair by an inch, and she recognized the movement. He did it when he was thinking, when he was restructuring information into a new configuration. She had watched him do it across a board table once, 5 years and another lifetime ago, and it had looked powerful then. Now it made her stomach tighten. Why did you come to this city? he said. It was... She stopped, pressed her lips together. It was as far as I could get on the resources I had at the time. You've had 2 years here. You could have moved. I know. Why didn't you? She looked at him across the table and thought about the honest answer to that question, which was complicated and layered and involved things she was not willing to say in a restaurant where someone had already proven they knew she'd be. I got tired, she said, which was true, even if it wasn't complete. Something moved in his expression. Subtle. The kind of movement she would have missed if she hadn't been looking directly at him. He opened his mouth. His phone buzzed on the table between them. Once, short, the kind of alert pattern she recognized as a flagged message from someone he'd set to priority. He looked down at it for 2 seconds, and she watched his face go absolutely flat, in the way faces go flat when the news is bad enough to require composure. "What is it?" she said. He turned the phone to face her. The message was 4 words from a contact listed only as a single initial. "They're inside. East entrance." She was on her feet before the thought fully formed. Her bag was in her hand, coat half on, the survival instinct that had been running as background noise for 5 years suddenly loud as a fire alarm. Damien was already moving, not toward the main entrance but toward the back, away from the east, his hand at the small of her back, not quite touching. The gesture of a man redirecting without grabbing, respecting a line even in a crisis, and she had a fraction of a second to be surprised by it before they were through the kitchen and the smell of food hit her. And the staff scattered without being asked because the staff had clearly been briefed for something like this. A door, a corridor, cold air. They came out into a narrow alley between buildings, and there was already a car there, a different car from the one that had brought them, engine running, a driver she didn't recognize who didn't look at either of them. Damien opened the back door. She stopped. "Get in," he said. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere they don't know." "How do I know you're not—" "Because if I wanted to hand you to someone, I would have done it 3 weeks ago." His voice was low and controlled, but there was an edge in it now that hadn't been there in the restaurant. Something pulled tighter, something that was managing urgency without performing it. And because whoever just walked through that east entrance is not there for me. She stood in the alley with the cold air moving through her coat and looked at him and thought about every exit she'd planned and every identity she'd prepared and how none of it had been enough. She got in the car. He got in beside her. The door closed. The car moved. "Your phone," he said. She handed it to him without being asked. He removed the SIM card with the practiced efficiency of a man who had done this before, which she supposed he had. He handed the phone back, pocketed the card. "My people are sweeping the restaurant," he said. "We'll know in 20 minutes who came in and how they identified the location." "They had your communications," she said. "Or yours." "I don't have—" She stopped. Thought. "My work laptop." He looked at her. "I brought it today," she said. "To the orientation. I had it in my bag when we left the office." Her voice was very steady, which was a thing she had trained herself to do, be very steady exactly when she was not. "It was issued by the company, the old company before the acquisition." His jaw tightened. "They had access to the company's systems," he said. It wasn't a question. "For how long?" she said. "I don't know. But if they flagged my employee profile, they knew you were there before I did." He said it quietly, working it out. "They knew for weeks, possibly months." A pause. They were waiting. For what? He looked out the window at the city moving past, and when he turned back, his expression had settled into something she recognized as the face he wore when he had made a decision he didn't particularly like but was fully committed to. "For you to have contact with someone who could be used as leverage," he said. She heard it, understood it, felt the implication of it settle into her chest like something heavy and cold. "They think you're leverage," she said. "They think I'm a tool." His voice was even. "A way to apply pressure. Then you need to go." She said it quickly, before the part of her that was not operating on pure logic could interfere. "You need distance from me, the more the better, because if they think you're useful to them, they will—" Evelyn. Quiet, firm, final. "I'm serious, Damien. You don't know these people. Stop." He turned to look at her fully, and there was something in his face she had seen once before, years ago. In a brief moment in a hallway outside a boardroom, and she had never been able to file it correctly in the catalog of expressions she kept for him. Do you understand what it took me to find a reason to walk away from you the first time? She went very still. I told myself you chose it, he said. I told myself it was your decision, and pride was a reasonable response, and eventually I'd stop. He stopped himself. His jaw worked. I'm not doing that again. So you can stop trying to manage my exit, because there isn't one. Not from this. The car turned a corner. Outside, the city continued. She looked at her own hands in her lap. You don't know who I am, she said. Not really. Not all of it. I know enough. You don't. She raised her eyes to his. There are things in my past that would change how you look at me. Things I did. Things my family did. Things that... Her voice went carefully, precisely, flat. If you knew the whole truth about where I come from, you wouldn't be sitting in this car. He looked at her without flinching. Try me, he said. She opened her mouth. His phone buzzed again. He glanced at it. Something in his face shifted. A sharp, specific tightening she had never seen on him before, which meant it was something new, something outside his existing map of bad situations. He held the phone so she could see the screen. The message was from the same initial contact, and this time it was longer. Retrieved footage from East Entrance. The man who led the team. We've run him twice. No matches in any of our systems, but the woman with him made us. She's confirmed. Old file, sealed. The woman is listed as deceased. She's using a name we recognize. The name is Evelyn Hart. The car kept moving. Evelyn looked at the message and felt something drop through the floor of her understanding of the last 5 years. Something she had believed was solid, and was apparently not. And the thing that replaced it was not fear, not exactly, but something older and colder and far more specific. Someone was using her name. Someone who was supposed to be dead was walking through restaurant entrances in her name. And somewhere in the architecture of that fact was a truth she had been running from for 5 years that was about to catch her, whether she was ready or not. She looked up from the phone. Damien was watching her face. You know who it is, he said. It wasn't a question. She did know. The knowledge had arrived fully formed the moment she'd read the message, slotting into place with the terrible neatness of things that were always going to be true. Yes, she said. Tell me. She pressed her lips together, looked at the city through the window, thought about every decision she had made in 5 years that had been built on a foundation she now understood had been wrong from the beginning. Then she turned back to him, and for the first time since the conference room, she was not managing her expression at all. The person using my name, she said, is someone I watched die. Damien didn't say anything for 11 seconds. She counted them. It was the kind of thing you did when the alternative was letting your mind follow the thought to its full conclusion before you were ready. And she was not ready. She was not anywhere close to ready for what the message on his phone meant about the last 5 years of her life. Walk me through it, he said finally. His voice was the controlled kind of quiet, the kind that came after the first wave of reaction had been processed and filed and replaced with function. She recognized it because she had developed the same skill, and recognizing it in someone else felt strange, like looking at a mirror that showed something slightly wrong. His name was Luca, she said. My brother. Damien's hand resting on his knee did not move. Older or younger, he said. Older, by 4 years. She looked at the back of the driver's headrest, which was a neutral thing to look at. He was the one my father trusted, the one who was being trained to take over. I was the one who was being traded. She said it without particular inflection, because inflection made it harder to say. Those were the 2 roles available in my family, heir and commodity. And you watched him die. I watched my father shoot him. The words came out flat and ordered, the way words come out when you have said them to yourself so many times in the dark that they have lost their texture. We were trying to leave together. Luca he'd had enough. He told me there was a way out, that he had contacts, that if we moved in a specific window we could both get clear. She paused. My father found out. Outside the car, the city was thinning. They were moving away from downtown toward neighborhoods that asked fewer questions. He shot Luca in front of me, she continued. In the entrance hall of the house we grew up in. Luca went down and didn't move, and there was... She stopped for half a second, not for emotion, but for accuracy, because accuracy mattered. There was a great deal of blood. My father looked at me and told me to go to my room, like I was 12, like he hadn't just... Another stop. I ran instead. I ran and I kept running, and I became someone else, and I never went back. Damien was very still beside her. You never confirmed, he said. She turned to look at him. What? You never confirmed he was dead. His voice was careful, clinical. He was doing what he did, pulling the operational thread. You saw him fall. You saw blood. But you ran before he didn't move, Damien. Bodies that aren't dead also don't move sometimes. She opened her mouth, closed it. The thought was not new. She had had it once, in the first year, in the middle of a night when sleep had refused to come, and her mind had gone to every dark corner it could find. She had dismissed it because the alternative, that Luca was alive and had not found her, had not reached for her in 5 years, had been too complicated to hold. But the message on Damien's phone had just made it a great deal less complicated, and a great deal more terrible. If he's alive, she said slowly, and he's using my name, then someone wanted you to know he's alive. Damien's jaw was set. Or someone wanted us to know. Or he wanted us to panic. She was working through it now, the same way she used to work through her father's logic when she was young and learning to predict which version of him would come through the door. If he leads a team through the east entrance of a restaurant using a name that would only mean something to me, he's not trying to stay hidden, he's announcing himself. Why? She thought about the brother she remembered. Older by 4 years, precise in everything, the one who had taught her how to read exits the way their father had taught him. The one who had said, in a hallway 6 years ago, I found a way out for both of us. The one whose blood she had seen spreading across white marble tile. Because he knows I'd freeze, she said. He knows what that name would do to me. And whatever he wants, he needs me off balance first. Damien looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone and typed something. Set it down. My intelligence chief is pulling everything on your family name, he said. Real name. She went cold. Don't, she said. It's already sent. Damien, she turned to face him fully. You don't understand what you're pulling on. My father's organization, it's not something you look at without being seen looking. The moment your people start searching, my people know how to search without being seen. Not in this, not against... She stopped herself, took a breath, chose the next words with precision. There are organizations that maintain active intelligence on anyone who investigates them, not retroactively, in real time. If your man runs a search on my family name, there will be a flag somewhere within the hour. Then we have an hour, Damien said without changing his expression. She stared at him. You understand what I'm telling you, she said. Careful, deliberate. My father runs one of the oldest criminal structures on the eastern seaboard. He has people embedded in 3 federal agencies. He has, Damien, he has people who make people like you look careful and small, and I mean that with absolutely no disrespect. I understand. Then why? Because they already know where you are. His voice was very quiet now, the quietest it had been all evening. They've known for longer than we realized. The surveillance team, the communications intercept, the person using your name. This isn't a search operation anymore. This is a closing in. He looked at her. Whatever they've been waiting for, they've decided to stop waiting. She sat with that. It landed the way true things landed. Not with shock exactly, but with the particular awful familiarity of a reality you had been refusing to fully admit. They're moving because of you, she said. I know. My appearance in your company, it accelerated something. They were content to watch and wait until I had a connection to someone with resources, and now they think they can use the connection. He nodded once. Which means we're past the point where you run and they follow and nothing changes. We're at the part where it ends one way or another. The car slowed. She looked out and saw a building. Industrial exterior, converted interior, the kind of place that looked like nothing from the street and was everything from the inside, which was exactly the aesthetic of Damien's organizational infrastructure as she remembered it. The driver got out, opened the door. Neither of them moved for a moment. Come inside, Damien said. We'll have information in 40 minutes. Then we decide. Decide what? How to end it. She looked at him, studied the lines of his face in the ambient light from the street. the exhaustion that lived beneath the control, the something else that lived beneath that. She got out of the car. The interior was exactly what she expected: sparse, functional, the aesthetic of a space built entirely around purpose and stripped of anything that didn't serve it. Two men she didn't recognize acknowledged Damien with the kind of minimal professional deference that meant they were good at their jobs and knew better than to perform it. One of them handed Damien a tablet. He looked at it briefly and handed it back. "Conference room," he said. They were led to a room with a table, 4 chairs, and a wall screen currently displaying a map of the city with colored markers she couldn't immediately interpret. She sat in a chair that put the door in her peripheral vision and didn't apologize for it. Damien sat across from her, set the tablet face down on the table. "My intelligence chief," he said. "He'll be on in 10 minutes. She nodded. The silence was different in here, workable, the kind of silence that existed in the margins of action. "Tell me about your father," Damien said. She looked up. "The functional version," he added, "not the personal one. What he runs, how he runs it, who answers to him." She had never said it out loud to anyone. The entire architecture of what she'd run from. She had described pieces, hinted at edges, but the whole shape of it she had kept locked because the whole shape of it was the kind of information that changed the people who received it. "His name is Roland Hart," she said. "It's not his real name, but it's the one that matters organizationally. He built a network over 30 years that operates through legitimate business infrastructure on the surface. Construction, logistics, property development. Underneath, it controls significant criminal revenue across cargo operations, document manufacture, and political leverage." She paused. "He doesn't run it through violence primarily. He runs it through debt. He finds people at their lowest points and he extends resources and then he owns them, completely. The violence is a last resort." "He saved it for family," Damien said. She didn't answer that. "How large is the network?" "I was 22 when I left. I knew what I knew." She pressed her palms flat on the table. "But large enough that he's never been formally investigated. Not successfully. Any inquiry that started stopped." "Who was promised your contract?" She looked at him sharply. He held the gaze. "You said he had an arrangement," Damien said. "Before you met me. A man who believes he has a claim. That means Roland Hart made a specific agreement with a specific person." She was quiet for a moment. "A man named Serrano," she said. "Marco Serrano. He runs—" She stopped. Damien's expression shifted by a degree. "Say that again," he said. "Marco Serrano, he's—" "I know who Marco Serrano is." Damien's voice had gone somewhere different, not louder, deeper, something moving underneath it that she hadn't heard before. "Serrano Capital. The investment group that approached me 8 months ago about a co-acquisition." She felt the room tilt by a fraction. "You know him," she said. "I declined the partnership." His jaw was working. "I declined it because something in the due diligence didn't sit right. His organizational structure had gaps that weren't explained by any legitimate reason." He looked at her. "The acquisition I made, the one that brought me to your company, it was the same asset Serrano had been pursuing for 14 months. She understood what that meant before he finished saying it. "He wasn't pursuing the company," she said. "No. He was pursuing me. And when he couldn't acquire the asset through his own organization," Damien said, "he tried to partner with mine. When I declined, he needed a way into your network that didn't require your cooperation." She was on her feet without quite deciding to stand. "The surveillance on my communications. They weren't just watching me. They were using my connection to your company to map your infrastructure." She pressed one hand against the table. "Damien, they've been inside your systems." He picked up the tablet, made a call. When the voice answered, he said 4 words that were clearly a code rather than a sentence, and the voice on the other end said something brief and direct, and then the call ended. He put the tablet down. "Security sweep," he said. "Full spectrum." "How long have I worked at that company?" she said. It came out thin. She heard it and didn't like it and couldn't help it. 2 years. I have been there for 2 years, and if they were using my access profile to, we'll know what they accessed in an hour. An hour. She turned away from him, pressed her fingers to the bridge of her nose. An hour is too long if they've already... The door opened. The man who came in was mid-40s, compact, with the kind of face that had learned long ago how to not betray information through expression. He set a closed folder on the table without looking at either of them, which meant the folder contained something that required a moment's emotional buffer before delivery. She recognized the behavior because she used it herself. "Reeves," Damien said. The man, Reeves, opened the folder. "We ran the partial search," he said. "Shallow trace. Nothing that would flag. We found enough." He looked at Damien, then at her, with the specific assessment of a professional deciding how to present information to a civilian. "Ma'am, I need to know if you're aware of your family's intersection with Damien Voss's organization prior to your marriage." She felt something shift in the room. "What intersection?" she said. Reeves looked at Damien. "Tell her," Damien said. His voice was very even. 17 years ago, Reeves said, his eyes returning to her, "a man named Vincent Voss was killed. He was—" "I know who Vincent Voss was," she said. She had heard the name. Anyone who spent time near Damien's world heard the name eventually. The father, the assassination, the event that had reshaped everything Damien had subsequently built. "He was Damien's father." "Yes," Reeves paused. "The order for his assassination was traced at the time to a mid-level operative who was subsequently eliminated. The investigation closed. The source was officially unknown." He looked at the folder. "It wasn't unknown. The order came from Roland Hart." The word Roland landed in the room and took all the air with it. She heard herself say from a very great distance, "That's not possible." "The documentation is—" "My father had no connection to Vincent Voss. They operated in completely different— They intersected over a property acquisition in the Northern Corridor 17 years ago," Reeves said patiently, in the way of a man who had verified something multiple times before bringing it into this room. "Vincent Voss was blocking a deal that Roland Hart needed to complete. The order was placed through a third-party broker, 3 layers of separation. It took us 11 years of passive collection to close the chain." He looked at her. "We've had the documentation for 6 years. It's been sealed inside our organization pending a decision about what to do with it." She looked at Damien. He was looking at the table. The precise, controlled flatness of his face was doing something she had never seen it do. It was working, actively working, every muscle performing the function of containment, while something underneath it moved in a way she couldn't name and didn't want to. 6 years, she said quietly. "You've known for 6 years." He raised his eyes to hers. "I didn't know about you," he said. His voice came out even, but barely. "I knew about Hart. I didn't know you were his daughter, not until tonight." She heard that, processed it. The woman he had married for a business alliance was the daughter of the man who had ordered his father's death. She had run from him 5 years ago because she was afraid he would despise her if he knew who she was. And here, now, on the other side of every mile and every false name and every carefully constructed ordinary morning, was precisely the reason she had been right to be afraid. "Say something," she said. He was quiet for 3 seconds. "Reeves," he said, "give us the room." Reeves took the folder and left without a word. The door closed. She and Damien were alone in a room with a map on the wall and a table between them and 17 years of blood that she had not put there but that bore her father's fingerprints, which meant it bore her name. "I didn't know," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I did not know my father was connected to your family." "I believe you," he said, quietly, immediately. "Then why—" "I'm not angry at you." His hands were on the table, flat, pressed down in a way that looked like control. "I'm angry, but not at you." She looked at him. At the particular stillness he was generating from the inside out, the kind of stillness that cost something to maintain. "What does this change?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "Damien, nothing changes." Harder now, the control cracking slightly at the edge. "You think I don't know the difference between what you did and what he did? You think I'm going to—" He stopped. Reset. The jaw again, working along the familiar line. "You were a child in his house. You didn't order anything. You didn't know." Half the world would disagree with that reasoning. "I'm not half the world." She looked at him for a long moment. The map on the wall behind him showed her city. The city she had rebuilt herself inside, street by street, false name by false name, small careful life by small careful life. and she thought about the 5 years of effort that had gone into becoming nobody, and how thoroughly and completely nobody had just ceased to be an option. "My father," she said, "will know that you know. If your people found this documentation, his intelligence will flag the search eventually, even shallow traces, I know. And Serrano is connected to my father. I don't know how deeply, but the arrangement he claims over me came from Roland Hart, which means Serrano and my father are working the same operation," Damien said. "Yes. Which means everything that happened tonight, the restaurant, the east entrance, Luca." She pressed her hand to her sternum, breathed. "It was coordinated, all of it. Roland and Serrano moving together, using Luca. If Luca is even—" She couldn't finish that sentence. "If your brother is alive and working with them," Damien said carefully, "then there are two possibilities. He's doing it willingly, or he's doing it because he doesn't have a choice." She thought about Luca, the brother who had taught her to read exits, who had said, "I found a way out for both of us," who had gone down on white marble and not gotten up. "He wouldn't work with my father willingly," she said. "Not after—" "Then your father has leverage over him," Damien said. "The same way he has leverage over everyone." She sat back down. Her legs had been deciding to do that for several minutes, and she had only just noticed. "What do we do?" she said. It came out smaller than she intended. Damien looked at her across the table, and his face was the face of a man who had just received news that rearranged the entire map of a 17-year plan, and who was rebuilding the map in real time, and who had decided, she could see it, the exact moment of decision, to rebuild it with her inside it instead of outside. "We stop running," he said. His phone lit up on the table between them. He glanced at it, held very still, turned it to face her. It was a message from Reeves, and it was 3 lines. "Serrano has made contact. He's requesting a meeting. He sent a photograph as proof of good faith. You need to see it before you respond." Damien turned the phone back and looked at the photograph for a long time before he passed it to her. She took it. The photograph was low resolution, taken in what looked like a parking structure, the lighting gray and flat. It showed 2 people. One of them was a man she didn't recognize, standing with his arms at his sides in the posture of someone who knew they were being photographed as a message rather than a memory. The other person was sitting. She was older than Evelyn remembered. Her hair was different, and there were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there the last time, which was 5 years ago and 3,000 miles from here. She was sitting with her hands visible, and her expression the specific blank of someone who had been told to look calm and was doing their best. Evelyn looked at the photograph for a long time. The woman sitting in the parking structure was Margaret Holloway. She was the only person in 5 years who had known Evelyn's real name. She was the woman who had helped Evelyn disappear. She was being held by Marco Serrano. And attached to the photograph, in a message that had been typed and sent with the cold efficiency of a man delivering a business communication rather than a threat, was a single line. "You have until midnight. Come alone, or she doesn't." Evelyn set the phone down on the table. Her hands were not shaking. She was aware of this as a fact that existed independently of how she felt, because feeling and function had learned to operate on separate tracks a long time ago. Damien was watching her face. "Who is she?" he said. Evelyn looked at him. "She's the reason I was able to disappear," she said. "She built the identity. She built all of them, every name I've used since I left." A pause. "She did it because I asked her to, and because she was a good person who believed she was helping someone who needed it, and she had no idea what she was actually stepping into." Serrano found her. Serrano found her. She looked at the phone. "Which means he found every identity she built for me. Which means—" "Every name you've used," Damien said quietly, "is burned." She looked at him. "Every exit I had prepared, every fallback, everything I built in 5 years in case I needed to run again." Her voice was very even. "It's all gone. Serrano has it all." Damien said nothing. "And if I don't go to him," she continued, "Margaret pays for it." "You're not going alone." He said, "I know what he said." Damien stood up. His chair moved back without drama, a simple physical fact. "He said it because he wants you isolated and controllable. The moment you walk in without resources, you don't walk back out." "And if I don't walk in at all, she—" "I know." He came around the table and stood 2 feet from her, and she looked up at him and saw the specific clarity of a man who had stopped weighing options and started choosing. We're not going alone, and we're not going blind, and we're not going to midnight. He looked at his watch. We have 4 hours, that's enough. Enough for what? To stop reacting, he said, and start deciding. She looked at him. At the man she had run from 5 years ago, who had found her in a conference room and put himself directly in the path of everything she had been afraid would follow her, and who was now standing in a room with a 17-year-old reason to walk away from her and was not walking anywhere. Damien, she said his name carefully. If this goes wrong, I know the risk. I don't think you do. She stood. They were very close, the closest they had been, and she didn't step back. My father is not someone who negotiates when he has the advantage. And right now he has Margaret, he has my identities, he has Serrano's resources, and he has Luca, whoever Luca is now, and whatever he's been building toward for 5 years. She held his gaze. He's not going to stop because we push back. He's going to push harder. Good, Damien said. She blinked. Good? I've been waiting 17 years to push back, he said. She looked at him for a long moment, in a room where 2 families' worth of wreckage had just been laid out on a table between them, and thought about what it meant to be past the point of retreat. Not just tactically, not just in terms of burned identities and midnight deadlines, and a woman sitting in a parking structure with her hands visible. Past it personally. Past it in the way that mattered most and was most irreversible. She nodded once. Then we need to make a plan, she said. And somewhere across the city, a phone rang in a room she'd never been to, and a man who believed she belonged to him smiled at the sound of it. 4 hours was not enough time. It was, however, what they had, and Damien Voss had built an empire on the principle that insufficient time was still time, and that the person who used it better than their opponent generally survived to complain about the shortage afterward. He gave Reeves 12 minutes to assemble what he needed in the conference room: city schematics, property records for the address Serrano had attached to his message, personnel availability across 4 separate operational teams, and a satellite pole on the parking structure mentioned in the photograph. 12 minutes because 12 was what the situation allowed, not because 12 was comfortable. Evelyn sat at the far end of the table and did not waste the 12 minutes. She had asked for a notepad and a pen. Not a tablet, not a keyboard, a notepad and a pen. And she wrote with the focused, slightly mechanical speed of someone externalizing a mental map they'd been maintaining internally for a long time. Names. Organizational structures. Connection points between Roland Hart's network and Marco Serrano's operation. Whatever she knew, which was 5 years old and full of gaps, but which was also the only intelligence they had about the interior architecture of what they were walking into. Damien watched her write for a moment before he moved to his own side of the table. She didn't write carefully. She didn't organize it neatly. She put it down in the order it came to her, some fast, cramped, with arrows connecting nodes and question marks where her memory ran out, and the shape of it, even from across the table, told him something about how she had survived 5 years alone. She had been carrying all of it in her head. Every name, every connection, every piece of her father's world that she had absorbed before she ran, stored and maintained and cross-referenced against every new piece of information she gathered in the years after. She had been surviving on intelligence she couldn't share with anyone. He understood that specific exhaustion. Reeves came back at 11 minutes 40 seconds with 3 other people. 2 Damien trusted with his life, and 1 he trusted with most of it. And the compressed, efficient shorthand of people who had done this kind of preparation before under worse conditions. The location Serrano had specified was a converted warehouse in the Port District. 2 main access points at street level, 3 possible secondary access points through adjacent structures. Underground connection to a loading corridor that hadn't been on any city map updated in the last decade, but showed up clearly in the archived infrastructure Paul Reeves had sourced from a contact in the city planning office. Evelyn looked at the schematic for 30 seconds and put her finger on a point in the northeast section. He'll put Margaret here, she said, or close to it. Central location, maximum distance from all exits. She's the leverage. He'll keep the leverage where pulling her out costs the most. You know his operational style? Reeves asked. I know my father's operational style, she said, without looking up from the schematic. And Serrano learned from my father. He uses human leverage the way other people use locked doors. The goal isn't to use it. The goal is to make you aware of it constantly so that every decision you make is already compromised before you make it. Reeves looked at Damien. Damien nodded once. She's right, he said. Plan the extraction from the northeast corner first. They worked for 2 hours and 40 minutes without stopping. Evelyn ate something at some point. She genuinely couldn't have named what it was, something that appeared at her elbow and disappeared because she needed calories, and her body had filed the request without consulting her attention, and drank 2 cups of coffee that went cold before she finished them. She noted the exits from the planning room 3 times out of habit and stopped checking after the 3rd time because the habit was not useful here. Here was not a room she needed to escape, but the habit was not yet convinced. At 1:30 in the morning, Damien called a 15-minute break. She stepped into a corridor and stood with her back against the wall and her eyes closed. Not sleeping, just stopping. She heard him before she saw him. Those same measured footsteps in the hallway, same as the conference room that morning, same as 5 years of memory. And then he was standing a few feet away with 2 cups of something hot. Not coffee, he said, offering one. You've had enough. She took it. Tea. She didn't like tea but drank it anyway because the gesture of it mattered in a way she wasn't prepared to examine closely. You should try to sleep for an hour, he said. So should you. I will. When? After you. She looked at him sideways. He was looking at the opposite wall with the expression of a man whose mind had not stopped working since the moment he'd seen her across a conference room and said 2 words that split her world in half. You planned an operation against a 2-front criminal network in 4 hours, she said. 3 fronts, he said. Your father, Serrano, and whoever Luca is working for or with. We don't have clean intelligence on Luca's current role. I know. She pressed the cup between both hands. I've been trying not to think about that specifically. He was quiet for a moment. The possibility that he's compromised, Damien said carefully, doesn't rule out the possibility that he's reachable. Don't. She said it quietly. Don't give me hope about him, and then let me walk into a room where he's pointing something at me. I can't. She stopped. I need to go in there treating him as unknown. If he turns out to be reachable, that's better than the alternative. But I can't plan for it. Understood. Another silence. Not uncomfortable. Damien. She looked at the cup in her hands. When this is over, however it goes, the documentation about your father, about Roland Hart's order. He didn't say anything. It doesn't fix it, she said. I know that. There's nothing that fixes it. But I want you to know that if I had known for a single day who my father was to your family, I know, he said. I'm not saying it to manage your feelings about me. I'm saying it because it's true and it needs to be said out loud. He turned his head and looked at her. In the light of the corridor, he looked tired in a real human way, not weakened, just marked by the hours. And she thought about the 17-year-old version of him who had lost his father to a business decision made by a man she used to pass in the hallway every morning. I know, he said again, and this time it meant something different. Evelyn, I know. She nodded, looked back at her cup. 15 minutes is up, he said. Yes, she said. They went back inside. They left at 1:45. 4 vehicles staggered by 6 minutes each to avoid convoy identification. Evelyn rode in the second vehicle with Damien and Reeves, and a woman named Carla, who had been introduced without further explanation and who carried herself with the particular compact readiness of someone trained in environments where readiness was not optional. The city at midnight had a different atmosphere than the city at noon. Fewer people to provide cover, more silence to carry sound, the particular exposed quality of open streets under amber light. Evelyn watched it through the window and tried to keep her breathing even, which was a thing she had to actively manage because her body understood they were moving toward danger and had opinions about it. Contact check, Reeves said. 3 brief confirmations came through the earpiece she'd been given. Teams 1, 3, and 4 in position. Team 2 was theirs. We're 8 minutes out, the driver said. Damien's hand was resting on the seat between them. Not on her hand, near it. She was aware of it the way you were aware of something that was making a deliberate choice. She put her hand over his, once, briefly, then put it back in her lap. He didn't react visibly, but his jaw lost a degree of tension that she hadn't noticed it was holding. 4 minutes, the driver said. Reeves, Damien said. Ready. Carla. Ready. He looked at Evelyn. I'm ready, she said, before he could ask. Because being asked would have required an honest answer, and the honest answer was that she was terrified and exhausted and had not been ready for any of the things that had happened in the last 14 hours. But that ready was a luxury for operations that had more than 4 hours of preparation time, and she was going in regardless. The vehicle stopped 2 blocks from the target. They moved on foot through an alley that smelled of old water and industrial solvent, Evelyn keeping pace behind Carla, Damien a step behind her. She could hear his breathing, regular, controlled, the breathing of a man who had done this before and had made the decision to do it well. The earpiece in her left ear produced the occasional brief communication from the other teams. Quiet. Functional. The vocabulary of people moving into position. The warehouse resolved from the darkness ahead. Large, rectangular, lights visible through high windows. The specific quality of illuminated interior space that meant people were inside and not trying to hide the fact. He wants us to know he's here, she thought. He wants us walking in with full awareness of being watched. That's the point. A signal came through the earpiece. Team 1, northeast corner confirmed. Secondary access viable. Team 3, underground corridor clear, loading entrance accessible. Team 4. And here there was a pause, a second longer than the others. The kind of pause that preceded information that required a breath before delivery. Team 4, Reeves said quietly. Report. There's a 4th vehicle in the south lot, the Team 4 lead said. Not on the original survey. It arrived in the last 20 minutes. Plates? Clean. No registration match in any of our systems. Damien and Reeves exchanged a look in the dark. Hold positions, Damien said low. We go in on my signal. They moved to the outer wall of the warehouse. Carla produced a device that Evelyn recognized as a structural sensor, the kind that read heat signatures through walls without needing direct access, and pressed it to the brick. The readout appeared on a small screen. Evelyn counted the heat signatures. 9, in the northeast quadrant. 1 separated from the others by a significant distance, seated, minimal movement. Margaret. 11 in the main floor area, standing, moving, arranged in patterns that said armed and positioned. Tactical arrangement, not security personnel standing around, personnel who had been placed. And in the south section, near the unregistered vehicle, 4 signatures that were completely still in a way that bodies doing nothing were not usually still. The stillness of people waiting for a specific signal. Who's in the south section? She murmured. Unknown, Reeves said. They're not Serrano's people, Carla said quietly. Wrong positioning. Serrano's people are arranged for a reception, greeting formation, essentially. The south group is arranged for a firing solution. Evelyn's stomach dropped. Someone brought a second team, Damien said. It was not a question. Someone who knows we're here, Reeves said, or who knew we'd be here regardless of whether we figured out the meeting. My father, Evelyn said. Everyone looked at her. Serrano set the meeting, she said. Roland Hart knew Serrano would set the meeting. He doesn't trust Serrano to close this. He sent a backup. The cold certainty of it settled through her. He's been running Serrano as a tool all along. The moment Serrano delivers me, Roland eliminates Serrano and takes back control of the situation. Which means Serrano doesn't know the South team is there, Damien said. Serrano thinks he has leverage over Roland through me, she said. He doesn't understand that my father doesn't let anyone have leverage over him for long. Damien looked at Reeves. Change of plan, he said. We go in loud enough that Serrano's people react before Roland's people can coordinate. If they're both responding to us, they're not coordinating with each other. That significantly increases our exposure, Reeves said. Yes, Damien said. Reeves nodded once, passed the adjustment through to the other teams in 7 words. Damien looked at Evelyn. Stay close to Carla, he said. Northeast, Margaret first, then we move. Don't stop for anything on the main floor. Reeves handles the south corridor. Understood, she said. His hand found her arm for 1 second. Not restraining, not reassuring exactly. Just contact, brief and deliberate, the kind that said, I see you without having the time to say anything else. Then Team 1 came through the earpiece. Breach on your mark. Mark, Damien said. The warehouse door came off its hinges with a sound like a word she didn't have. The main floor was noise and light and bodies moving in multiple directions and the specific overwhelming confusion of a space that had been calm 30 seconds ago and was no longer calm in any sense. Evelyn moved. She didn't watch what was happening around her because watching was a way to stop and stopping was a way to die. She tracked Carla's back and kept her feet moving and her head below the line of sight from the upper walkway, which Reeves had designated a risk point, and which was making itself known by the presence of a figure up there who hadn't been on the heat sensor readout because the readout ceiling reach hadn't extended to the catwalk level. She heard a shot from above. Carla pulled her sideways into a support pillar's shadow without breaking stride. The shot went into concrete. The figure on the catwalk shouted something in a language she didn't recognize and was answered by a sound from Team 1's position that ended the shouting. Ahead, the northeast quadrant, a partition wall, a door, the heat signature that meant Margaret. Carla hit the door with her shoulder. It opened. Margaret was there. She was sitting with her wrists secured to a metal chair, and her face was... She was not physically hurt. Evelyn registered that first. Checked it the way you check the most important thing before anything else. But her face was the face of a woman who had been sitting in a metal chair for an unknown number of hours, convinced she was going to die in it. Evelyn, Margaret said, and her voice was the voice of a person who had run out of saliva from stress. Just the name. Nothing else, because nothing else was necessary. I've got you, Evelyn said. She was already at the chair, hands on the restraints. I've got you, Margaret. Look at me. Margaret looked at her. I'm sorry, Margaret said. They asked me things and I tried not to. The identities, Evelyn, they might have... I know, it's okay. It wasn't, but that was a conversation for a different room. Carla. Carla was already there with a tool that dealt with the restraints in 4 seconds. Margaret stood and immediately sat back down on the chair because her legs were not cooperating. Evelyn crouched in front of her and held her hands and thought about the debt she owed this woman, who had asked nothing, who had helped because she was the kind of person who helped, who had built false lives for a stranger and paid for it by sitting in a metal chair in a warehouse at midnight, and felt the specific weight of that debt press into the space behind her sternum. Can you walk? Evelyn asked. Yes. Margaret pressed her lips together. Yes. Give me... Yes. Carla will take you out through the northeast access point. There's a vehicle 2 blocks north. Where are you going? I'll be right behind you. Margaret's eyes searched her face with the look of a woman who understood that right behind you was not a guarantee but was the only answer available. Don't do anything stupid, Margaret said. I won't, Evelyn said. Margaret nodded. Carla helped her stand and they moved. Evelyn turned around. The main floor had reconfigured itself in the 2 minutes she'd been in the northeast room. Damien's teams had pushed Serrano's people back toward the south wall, which had the effect of compressing them toward the unregistered vehicle and Roland Hart's secondary team, whose presence none of them had been expecting. The collision of those two groups was producing the kind of tactical confusion that was extraordinarily dangerous for everyone present, and was, in a narrow operational sense, exactly what Damien had intended. She found Damien behind an overturned loading pallet, Reeves 2 meters to his left, both of them reading a situation that was louder and messier and less controlled than the plan had described. Margaret's out, she said. Good. He didn't look at her. His attention was on a doorway across the main floor through which a man in a gray suit was visible, unhurried, unruffled, watching the chaos of his own operation unravel with the expression of someone assessing a financial loss. Serrano's in the building. She looked. Marco Serrano was exactly what she had always imagined from her father's descriptions. Compact, immaculate, the kind of man whose suit cost more than most people's monthly income, and who wore it in the middle of a warehouse firefight, as if this were a boardroom and the firefight were a scheduling conflict. He was flanked by 2 people, but he was not looking at the chaos. He was looking at her. He wants to talk, Damien said. I know. He wants to separate you from... I know, Damien. She looked at Serrano across the distance of the main floor. He inclined his head slightly. A greeting, almost courteous, the gesture of a man who had waited a long time for this particular meeting and was pleased it was finally happening. How many of his people are still upright? 6, possibly 7. My teams have the rest. A pause. Roland's people are the unknown. They haven't fully committed to either side yet. Because they're waiting for Roland's signal, she said. And Roland's signal depends on Serrano delivering me first. She tracked the doorway, the two flanking personnel, the distance. If Serrano doesn't deliver, Roland will redefine the mission. Meaning? Meaning everyone in this building becomes expendable. She looked at Damien, including Serrano. Damien absorbed that. Then we need Serrano to understand his position, he said. He won't believe us. No, Damien said, but he might believe his own intelligence. He looked at Reeves. The documentation on Roland's order, the assassination file. Reeves reached into his jacket, produced a phone with the file already open. Damien looked at Evelyn. You're the one he came for, Damien said. He'll take the meeting from you before he'll take it from me. She understood what he was saying. She understood what it would cost. Walking across that floor meant being in Serrano's operational space, visible to Roland's people, dependent on Damien's teams maintaining enough control to make the space survivable. She understood all of it, and she was still angry. A cold, clean, very old anger that had been sitting in her chest since she was a young woman in a family that treated her as property and had never once asked what she wanted. She took Reeves's phone. She stood up. Damien caught her wrist. Once, lightly, not stopping her. Evelyn. She looked back at him. I'll be right behind you, he said. She recognized the words. She nodded once. She walked across the floor. Serrano didn't move as she approached. His two people tensed. She saw it, the micro-adjustments of trained personnel responding to a variable moving out of its expected position. But he held up one hand and they stilled. She stopped 6 feet from him. Miss Hart, he said. His voice was exactly as she'd imagined. Smooth, pleased with itself, carrying the register of a man who had decided this moment would go the way he had planned it for years. You look like your father. I've been told that before, she said. It's not a compliment. Something in his expression shifted slightly, just the edge of his mouth, an acknowledgement. You understand the situation, I hope. There's no need for any of this to continue. Your legal entanglement with Mr. Voss, we can have that dissolved cleanly. You come with me, your friend walks away, and we move forward with the arrangement your father made. An arrangement I never agreed to. Arrangements of this kind don't generally require the agreement of all parties. They require it of me, she said, which is the part you seem to keep miscalculating. His eyes moved briefly to Damien's position across the floor, then back to her. Mr. Voss, he said, is not your future. He's an inconvenient detour. A pause. And he should be aware that his current interference puts him in a position that no business relationship can repair. I have something you should see, she said. She held out Reeves's phone. He looked at it, looked at her, took it. She watched his eyes move across the screen, watched the subtle reconfiguration of his expression, the thing that happened to someone's face when they received information that fundamentally realigned their understanding of the architecture they had been standing inside. It took him 23 seconds. Where did you get this? He said. It doesn't matter. This is... He looked up. His voice had gone somewhere different, careful. If this is accurate, your arrangement with Roland Hart, she said, was made by a man who has spent 30 years ensuring that the people who make arrangements with him end up owing rather than owning. He sent a second team tonight. She let that settle. South lot, 4 personnel, arrived 20 minutes before we did. She held his gaze. He was planning to take custody of me the moment you delivered. The arrangement was never going to pay out on your end. You were the logistics. He was always going to be the destination. Serrano was very still. One of his flanking personnel said something low, directed at him. He didn't respond to it. If Roland's people take action, Evelyn said, they'll take action against everyone in this building. That includes your remaining personnel. She paused. And you. I'm trying to give you information, she said. What you do with it is your choice. But the clock on that choice is whatever time it takes for Roland Hart to decide his secondary team is no longer waiting. She watched him think. She watched the construction behind his eyes, the recalculation, the remapping, the specific process of a man who had built his position on controlling variables, realizing that the most important variable had been controlling him. And then something happened that none of the plan had accounted for. A door in the south wall opened. Not the vehicle entrance. A side door, small, the kind of door that went on no schematic because it had been added informally and bricked into the building's secondary skin without filing. It opened and 3 people came through it. Not Roland's secondary team, not Serrano's remaining people, not any of Damien's 4 units. One of them moved like someone who had been shot at enough times to know how to move around the possibility of it. He was taller than Evelyn remembered, and the scar below his left ear was new, and his eyes, when they found her across the distance of the main floor, were the same. Completely, heartbreakingly the same. Luca Hart stopped walking. He looked at his sister. He said her name. Her real name, the first name, just the given name, in the voice of a man who has rehearsed something 1,000 times and still wasn't ready for the moment it happened. And she looked at the brother she had believed was dead, whose death she had carried for 5 years like a stone lodged below her sternum, and felt 5 years of grief and guilt and carefully managed survival fracture along every seam simultaneously. Damien appeared at her peripheral edge. She felt rather than saw him, the specific weight of his presence, the decision in it. Serrano looked between them. Roland Hart's secondary team was still in the south lot. Luca was still standing in the doorway. The earpiece in her left ear produced Reeves's voice. "We have movement in the south lot. Roland's team is deploying." Damien's hand found the center of her back. "Time to decide," he said. She looked at her brother, alive, real, standing 20 feet from her after 5 years of being dead. And she took one breath that she felt all the way down to the floor of her lungs. Then she made a choice that ended the version of herself that had been running since the night she watched him fall. "Luca," she said, and her voice was steady in the way voices are steady when they have passed through the fear and come out the other side. "Tell me you're not with him." Luca's jaw moved. His eyes did something complicated and fast. "I'm not," he said. "I haven't been." A pause. "I've been trying to get here before you did." "And Roland's people outside?" "They're not here for you," Luca said. "They're here for Serrano." He looked at the man beside her. "My father decided 3 days ago that Serrano had become a liability." He looked back at Evelyn. "He doesn't know I'm here. He doesn't know I've been—" His voice went carefully flat. "There are things I need to tell you. Things that change everything you think happened 5 years ago." Reeves's voice again, sharper. "South team is at the exterior wall. We have 60 seconds maximum." Damien looked at Luca with the eyes of a man assessing a variable that hadn't been in any of the intelligence. "Can you fight?" Damien said. Luca looked at him. "Who are you?" he said. "Her husband," Damien said without inflection. Something passed across Luca Hart's face that under different circumstances might have been the beginning of a response to that information. "Yes," he said instead. "I can fight." "Then get your people into position on the west wall. Roland's team hits the south. We push them towards Serrano's remaining personnel, and we end this in the next 4 minutes, or we don't end it at all." Luca nodded once. Moved. Serrano, still holding the phone with the documentation on his face, looked at Damien. "This changes my position," Serrano said. "Significantly," Damien agreed. "If Roland is moving against me, then you have exactly the same enemy we do," Evelyn said. "Which makes you useful for approximately the next 4 minutes. After that, we'll discuss what happens to you." Serrano looked at her for a long moment. Then he said something to his 2 remaining people that sent them toward the west wall. The south door came off its frame with a sound like something final. Roland Hart's team came through in a 4-person stack, moving with the clean, practiced efficiency of personnel who had done this 100 times and were not here for conversation. The first shot went high and wide. The second didn't. It caught Damien in the left shoulder and spun him back half a step. 1 step, controlled, absorbing it the way a man absorbs something he has decided to absorb. And he didn't go down, but the sound it made and the way his face registered it before his control shut the registration down, hit Evelyn somewhere that wasn't tactical and wasn't operational and had nothing to do with the plan. "Damien, I'm standing," he said. His voice was compressed. The way voices got compressed around pain that was being managed. "Keep moving." She looked at him, at the shoulder, at the controlled way he held his left arm. "Damien." "Evelyn." His eyes found hers, very direct, very clear. "I'm standing. Keep moving." She kept moving. Luca's people hit Roland's team from the west. Damien's teams pressed from the north and east. The four-person stack that had come through the south door was suddenly caught between three directions of pressure, and the tactical geometry of it collapsed the advantage they'd built on the way in. She moved through it, staying low, moving fast, tracking exits the way she had tracked exits every day for 5 years. Except now the exits weren't for her and weren't about running. Reeves reached her at the center of the floor. "Serrano's people have taken 2 of Roland's men," he said. "Roland's remaining 2 are—" A sound behind her. She turned. One of Roland's remaining team had broken from the collapse point and was moving toward her specifically. Not toward Damien, not toward Reeves, toward her, with the targeted intention of a person who had been given a specific directive that superseded the tactical situation. She had approximately 1 second. She used it. The man was larger than her and better trained and had 40 pounds on her, and she used none of those as reasons because reasons were a way of losing before you started. She went low, under his reach, and hit him at the knee with everything she had, which was not elegant and was not smooth. It was desperate, and it was effective, and it hurt her considerably more than she expected. And he went down and she was on top of him, and Luca appeared from nowhere and put it beyond question. She was breathing hard. Her hands were shaking. She stood up. Across the warehouse floor, the last of Roland's secondary team had been contained. Serrano's remaining people had their hands visible. Damien was upright, left arm held at a specific angle that was doing a lot of work, looking at her across the space between them with an expression she had never seen on him. She walked toward him. He watched her walk toward him. She stopped in front of him and put one hand very carefully on his good shoulder and looked at his face from close range and said nothing, because there was nothing yet that was the right size for this moment. He looked at her with that expression, the one she had never seen, the one that did not come from the controlled part of him, the part that had spent 17 years building walls and 5 more years being angry at her behind them, and said, very quietly, "You didn't run." "No," she said. "I told you." "I know what you told me," she said. "I didn't run." Something in his face. She held it, held his gaze, held her ground, held the weight of everything they had both carried through everything that had happened in the last 14 hours. And somewhere behind her, Luca Hart was breathing and alive and standing in a room that contained, for the first time, all the people and all the truths that 5 years of running had kept apart. The warehouse was quiet now, and the way things go quiet after the noise that preceded them was enormous enough to make the silence feel earned. Damien's hand, the right one, the one that worked, came up and covered hers where it rested on his shoulder. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. But outside, beyond the walls that had just contained a war that had been building for 17 years, a phone rang in a house somewhere in this city, and the man who answered it listened to a report of everything that had just happened to his operation, and his voice, when he responded, was the voice of a man who had not yet decided this was over. Roland Hart hung up the phone and began to make different arrangements. The bullet had gone clean through. That was what the doctor said. And Evelyn stood in the corridor outside the treatment room and held those 4 words in her head and repeated them to herself because they were the only 4 words in the English language that mattered right now. Clean through. Which meant it had not lodged. Which meant the damage was what it was, and not worse. Which meant the man currently on the other side of a closed door had a defined, finite injury rather than the other kind. She pressed her back against the wall and breathed through her nose. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. The technique she had learned in the second year of running when the panic attacks had become frequent enough to require a management strategy. Her hands were at her sides. She was aware that her right palm was still faintly tacky with blood that wasn't hers, and she did not look at it because looking at it would undo the 4 counts in and 4 counts out. Luca appeared at the end of the corridor at 2:15 in the morning. He walked toward her with the careful gait of a man who had taken hits of his own tonight and was redistributing his weight around them without drawing attention to it. She watched him come and felt the layered impossibility of him. Alive, present, real, wearing the scar below his left clavicle and 5 years of a life she hadn't been present for, and said nothing until he was close enough that saying nothing would have been its own kind of statement. "How bad?" he said. "Clean exit. Significant tissue damage. They're managing the blood loss." She paused. "He'll be all right." Luca exhaled through his nose, looked at the closed door. "He went in front of you," he said. "Yes." "On purpose." "Yes, Luca." Her brother stood beside her and looked at the door, and she could feel him processing that. The particular processing of a man who had spent years trying to find his sister and had arrived in time to watch a stranger take a bullet for her, which required a certain amount of recategorization. "Tell me about him," Luca said. She looked at the wall across from her. Cream-painted concrete, unremarkable, the kind of wall that existed in every functional building that prioritized utility over aesthetics. "He found me in a conference room," she said, "yesterday morning, which was apparently approximately 14 hours ago, though it doesn't feel like it." She paused. "He bought the company I was working for. He'd known where I was for 3 weeks before he walked through the door." Another pause. "He said he wanted to see if I'd run. Did you want to?" "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "I didn't." Luca was silent for several seconds. "The marriage," he said. "He mentioned contract marriage 5 years ago, before I left. It was a business arrangement that became—" She stopped, searched for the right word, didn't find one that was precise enough. "It became something else. And then I ran before it could finish becoming it." She looked at her hands. "He's been angry about it for 5 years. I think angry was easier than the alternative." "What's the alternative?" "That he cared, and I left anyway." She looked at her brother. "Which is what actually happened." Luca held her gaze. "Do you still?" he said. She didn't answer immediately because the immediate answer was the obvious one, and the obvious answer was not the same as the complete one. The complete one had layers that 5 years of not examining it had compacted into something dense and pressurized, and standing in a medical corridor at 2 in the morning was not the ideal context for fully decompressing it. But Luca was alive and she had buried him, and that particular fact made the question of honesty feel different than it usually did. "Yes," she said. "I do." He nodded once, didn't push further. This was one of the things she remembered about him. He had always known when to stop and when to continue, had always had the specific intelligence of knowing which silences needed filling and which ones needed leaving alone. She had missed that. She had missed him in the specific, daily, accumulating way you missed someone you expected to see and kept not seeing, not the dramatic grief of it, but the small, ordinary version, the reflexive reach for a person who wasn't there. "I need you to tell me everything," she said. "Everything from that night forward. I need the complete version." He looked at the wall. "Not tonight," he said. "Tonight. Evelyn, I have been carrying the wrong story for 5 years," she said. Quiet, but firm. The firmness of someone who had learned that deferring the hard conversation was just a way of carrying it longer. "I have been living inside a version of events that was constructed to control me, and I have made every decision since I was 22 years old based on information my father manufactured. I need the real version, tonight, even if it takes until morning." Luca turned to look at her. His face in the corridor light was older than the face she'd buried. Of course it was. 5 years had passed, but the specific shape of the aging was not the shape she would have predicted. There were lines that came from something other than time, the kind of lines that came from sustained and unrelieved stress, the kind that she recognized because she had developed her own version of them. "All right," he said. They sat down on the corridor floor, their backs against the wall, because the chairs available were the plastic kind that were too small and too far from the door. And the floor was closer to the door and also more honest. Sitting on floors was something they had done as children in the house they had both escaped, and it carried a particular quality of authenticity that the plastic chairs did not. Luca talked. He talked for an hour and 40 minutes, and Evelyn listened without interrupting, which was something she had also gotten better at in 5 years. He told her what had actually happened after the marble hallway, the wound, the recovery, the 2 months he had spent under effective house arrest while Roland Hart made calculations. He told her how Roland had used his survival as leverage from the beginning, how the father had explained with the calm clarity of a man describing a business strategy that Luca's continued existence was contingent on his usefulness, and that his usefulness was contingent on his cooperation. He told her about the 4 years of working inside Roland's organization with the specific grinding patience of a person who had decided that the only exit available was one he had to build himself. From the inside, one structural piece at a time, the contacts he had cultivated, the documentation he had gathered and hidden, the intelligence he had built about the network's actual architecture, not the surface architecture, the real one, The one that was designed to survive exposure of any individual component by having no individual component that was necessary. He told her about finding out about Serrano's claim, about the agreement Roland had made on her behalf before she was old enough to have been consulted, about the moment he had understood that his father had always intended to use both of his children as instruments and had simply applied different tools to each. He told her about Margaret, how Serrano had found her, how the information about Evelyn's identities had been extracted not through any failure of Margaret's character, but through a technical compromise of the documentation infrastructure she had used to build them. How Luca had known the moment it happened that the timeline had accelerated, that Roland was moving toward a conclusion, and how he had spent the subsequent 3 months positioning his own resources for exactly the operation that had unfolded tonight in the warehouse. "You were already planning for the warehouse," Evelyn said. "I was planning for a version of it," he said. "I didn't know Damien Voss would be the variable that accelerated Roland's decision. When Serrano came to Father with the acquisition information, when he explained that you'd been found in Voss's company, Roland made a decision to move immediately." He paused. "I had to move immediately too. The fourth vehicle," she said. "The people nobody could identify. Mine. 3 people I trust, which is not a long list, but it's enough." He looked at his hands. "I wasn't trying to save you from Serrano. I was trying to get there before Roland's secondary team could complete their actual objective." "Which wasn't me." "No," he said. "Not primarily. Roland wanted you, yes, but the secondary team's primary objective was Damien Voss." He met her eyes. "Roland decided that Voss's involvement had made him a strategic problem. The plan was to use the meeting, use Serrano delivering you, as cover for eliminating Voss and making it attributable to the chaos of the operation." She was very still. "He was planning to kill him," she said. "Yes." "And frame it as collateral." "Yes." He looked at her steadily. "My people took 2 of Roland's secondary team in the South Corridor. That's why the firing solution never completed." A pause. "That's why Voss is in there with a shoulder wound instead of something else entirely." She sat with that. The 4 counts in, 4 counts out was not currently adequate to the information she had just received, but she applied it anyway because it was what she had. "You saved him," she said. "My people did," Luca said. "In a corridor, in a warehouse, at midnight. It's not the kind of thing that gets recorded anywhere official." She looked at her brother. "Thank you," she said. He looked slightly uncomfortable in the way people look when gratitude arrives for something they did out of necessity and don't know how to receive as a gift. "Don't," he said. "I'm going to anyway," she said. "You came to a warehouse in the middle of the night with 3 people you trust to stop a firing solution aimed at a man you'd never met because he mattered to me. You didn't know he mattered to me. You inferred it." She held his gaze. "I'm going to say thank you, Luca. You're going to accept it." He looked at the wall. "Fine," he said. "Fine," she agreed. They sat on the floor until the doctor came out at 4:30 in the morning and said the words that mattered, and then the words that mattered less. And Evelyn stood up with the careful dignity of a woman who had been sitting on a corridor floor for 2 hours and whose body had opinions about that, and asked the question she needed answered. "Can I go in?" "He's awake," the doctor said. "He's been awake for a while. He asked if you were still here." She went in. Damien was sitting up. She had expected this, and it still landed wrong. The sight of him upright in a medical bed at 4:30 in the morning, left arm immobilized, pale in a specific way that was the color of significant blood loss and managed pain. Sitting up, because sitting up was apparently non-negotiable, regardless of what any medical professional had said about it. He looked at her when she came through the door. She looked at him. Neither of them spoke for a moment, and the moment was the kind that had too much in it to compress into an opening line, so they let it be large and didn't try to make it smaller. "Luca," he said. "Outside," she said. "He'll live. So will you. Allegedly." She moved to the chair beside the bed, sat down. "Close enough. I have a great deal to tell you." "Tell me the short version first," he said, "then the long one." She told him. The short version took 12 minutes, which was about right for a story that had 5 years of compressed information in it. She told him what Luca had told her. The night of the shooting, the 4 years inside Roland's organization, the secondary team's actual objective, what had happened in the South Corridor, what had been prevented and at what cost. Damien listened with the complete attention she had relearned tonight was one of the specific things about him that she had never adequately accounted for. He didn't speak until she finished. "He saved my life," Damien said. "His people did," Evelyn said, which amounts to the same thing. Damien was quiet for a moment. She could see him restructuring the map of the evening with the new information, the way he had restructured the restaurant and the conference room and every other environment in which she had watched him update his understanding. The restructuring took about 30 seconds. "What does he need?" Damien said. She looked at him. "What does Luca need?" he repeated. "To get out of Roland's organization cleanly. To have a life that isn't determined by whatever Roland built around him." He held her gaze. "What does he need to do that?" She felt something move in her chest. Not surprise, exactly. She had been learning all night that her map of Damien Voss had gaps, places where the man was larger and more specific than her 5-year-old version had accounted for. But something adjacent to surprise. The feeling of a thing arriving that you had hoped for and not quite believed in. "Resources," she said. "Intelligence support for extracting himself without leaving Roland any leverage. Legal protection for the cooperation he can offer in return." She paused. "And time. He's going to need time." "I have all of those," Damien said, simply, factually. She looked at him. "You don't owe him anything," she said. "No," he agreed. "I'm aware of that." "Then why—" "Because he's yours," Damien said. "And because he made a choice tonight that cost him something." He paused. "People who make choices like that when they could have made other choices deserve something in return." She held his gaze for a long moment. "You're not what I remembered," she said. Quiet. "You remembered me at 31, he said. "I was considerably less practiced at being a person then." She looked at him. The tiredness of him, the pain he was not discussing, the specificity of his attention even at 4:30 in the morning after being shot in a warehouse, and felt the things she had been managing and measuring and carefully not fully acknowledging for 14 hours arrive without permission and refused to be managed anymore. "I left because I was 22 and terrified, and I thought if you knew who I was, you would look at me the way my father looked at everyone. Like a problem to be managed," she said. "And I couldn't bear the idea of becoming that in your eyes. So I left before I could find out." She paused. "It was the wrong choice. I knew it was the wrong choice within the first year. But knowing it was wrong and being able to correct it are two different problems, and I couldn't see a way to correct it that didn't make everything worse." He looked at her without speaking. "I'm not telling you this so you'll forgive it," she said. "I'm telling you because you spent 5 years believing I left because I wanted to, and that's not true, and the truth matters even when it comes late." Damien was quiet for a long moment. "I told myself you chose it," he said. His voice had the quality of something being said for the first time after being held for a very long time. "I told myself it was a clean decision on your part, and that it had nothing to do with me, and that the correct response was to let it be clean." He paused. "That was also the wrong choice. I could have looked for you. I had the resources, I had the capability. I chose not to use them because looking for you would have meant admitting that you leaving had broken something that I preferred to pretend was unbroken." She listened. "I was 31 years old, and I had built my entire adult life on the principle that nothing I couldn't control was worth wanting," he said. "And you were the first thing in a long time that I hadn't controlled and hadn't wanted to control, and when you left, I made it mean that I'd been right to avoid that. That wanting things that couldn't be controlled was a weakness I had correctly identified." He looked at his hand, the right one, resting on the bed, the one that worked. "It wasn't correctness. It was damage. And I would like to stop being damaged in that specific direction, if that's available." She looked at him for a long moment. "It's available," she said. He exhaled, a long, controlled breath that released something along with the air. "Good," he said. She reached over and put her hand over his, the right one, the one on the bed, and left it there. And he turned his hand over and held hers, and that was the conversation as far as the words went, which was as far as the words needed to go. Outside, somewhere in the city, Roland Hart was making different arrangements. They both knew it. They sat with it, and they held hands anyway, because the arrangements Roland Hart was making would be addressed. And they would be addressed from a position that had not existed yesterday, which was a position that included all of the information, all of the people, and something that neither of them had been willing to call by its name until a corridor and a door and a doctor said 4 words that made the naming feel possible. What followed did not resolve in a week or a month. It resolved in 6 months of work that was unglamorous and specific and frequently frustrating, the kind of work that happened in rooms without windows and produced results that appeared in documents rather than events, and that accumulated slowly into something permanent. Luca became the center of it. What he had gathered over 4 years inside Roland Hart's organization was extraordinary in its detail and its patience. He had built, in the margins of a life he hadn't chosen, an intelligence file on his father's network that represented the kind of interior knowledge that no external investigation could have produced. Account structures, organizational hierarchies, the locations of documentation that Roland had believed was permanently secure, the identities of embedded contacts in agencies and institutions, the architecture of 30 years of debt-based control mapped with the precision of someone who had had nothing but time and motivation. Reeves spent 2 weeks with Luca's materials before he came back to Damien and said, with the measured delivery of a man who did not overstate things, that this was the most comprehensive intelligence package he had encountered in 22 years of operational work. Damien authorized full organizational resources for the operation on the same day. Evelyn worked with both of them. Not in any official capacity. There was no official capacity for what she was, which was a woman who had grown up inside the organization they were dismantling and who carried its internal logic in her bones. She knew how Roland Hart thought, how he prioritized, how he constructed the exits that he would attempt to use when he understood the walls were closing. She had spent 22 years learning his patterns as a survival strategy, and now those same patterns served a different purpose. She was useful. She had always been useful. The difference was that she was now useful on her own terms, toward her own ends, which was a distinction that turned out to matter enormously. Damien's shoulder healed in the way injuries healed when the person carrying them refused to respect the recovery timeline. Impatiently, incompletely, and then completely, with the joint's full function restored at 10 weeks and the remaining stiffness resolved by 12. He did the physical therapy with the thoroughness he applied to everything he decided to do well, and he was annoyed at the process in a way that was reassuring in its ordinariness. That was simply the annoyance of a person who wanted to be fully functional and was temporarily not. She watched him navigate the annoyance and thought about what it meant to know someone's patterns of frustration. To know that he went quiet when he was in pain rather than loud. To know that the tightness around his eyes in the morning was not mood but discomfort. To know that the way he held his coffee cup had shifted slightly to accommodate a grip he was retraining. She had not known any of these things 5 years ago. She was learning them now, daily, in the ordinary accumulation of proximity that was the actual texture of knowing another person. It was not smooth. They disagreed about operational decisions, about risk tolerance, about how much information to share with Luca and how quickly, about the question of Serrano and what accountability looked like for a man who had been both a participant in and a victim of Roland Hart's machinery. The disagreements were direct and occasionally heated and resolved through negotiation that neither of them had much experience with, because both of them had spent significant portions of their lives in contexts where they were the final authority and negotiation had not been a required skill. They were learning it. They were learning it in real time, with the friction and occasional inefficiency that learning anything genuinely difficult entailed. She thought this was probably the right way to learn it. In the 4th month, Roland Hart made contact. Not through lawyers, not through intermediaries. He contacted Evelyn directly, through a channel she had not known he had access to, which was its own information. It told her that his intelligence on her current position was more current than she'd accounted for, which she reported to Reeves within the hour. The message was brief. He wanted a meeting. No conditions, no threats. Just a meeting. She thought about it for 3 days before she responded. Damien did not tell her what to do about it. She registered this as significant, the specific quality of his restraint, the way he listened when she talked through it and offered analysis when she asked for analysis, and otherwise let the decision belong to her. It was the behavior of a person who understood the difference between support and control, and who had done work to know the difference. He wants to negotiate, she said on the second evening of thinking about it. Yes, Damien said. He thinks there's still a version of this where he comes out with something. She was standing at the window. A window in a building she had chosen without consulting any exit strategy, the detail of which she had not yet stopped noticing. He's been making arrangements, you know that. I know. If I take the meeting, he thinks it's an opening. Yes. If I don't take it, he continues making arrangements from wherever he is. Yes. A pause. You know him better than any analysis I can offer. She looked at the street below. Spring evening, the particular softening of the light, the city in its ordinary continuous motion. He's not trying to negotiate with me, she said slowly. He's trying to assess me. He needs to know what I've become, what I'm capable of, whether the version of me he built is still the version he's dealing with. She turned from the window. He's not afraid of the operation. He's afraid he doesn't know his opponent. Damien was watching her from the other side of the room. You're the variable he can't calculate, he said, because I was never supposed to be an opponent. She looked at him. I was supposed to be a resource. He designed me to be useful, not threatening, and I've become threatening, and he needs to understand how. The meeting is an intelligence operation, Damien said, for both of us. She paused. I want to take it. I know. Tell me what you think. He was quiet for a moment, not avoiding the question, gathering the answer. I think you're the most dangerous person he can meet right now because you know him completely and he only thinks he knows you, he said. I think the meeting carries real risk because Roland Hart is not safe in any context, and the risk doesn't disappear because the strategic logic is sound. He paused. And I think you've been running from this conversation your entire life, and the only way it stops being something you're running from is if you have it. She looked at him. Carla goes with me, she said. Carla and 2 others, he said, and I want a real-time line to Reeves from the moment you walk in. Agreed. And if anything feels wrong, I'll walk out. She met his eyes. I'm not 22 anymore. I know the difference between a fear worth listening to and a fear I've outgrown. He held her gaze. I know you do, he said. She called Luca that night and told him about the message. He was silent for a long moment before he said, He's testing the walls. She said, I know. He said, Be careful. She said, I will. Then he said, Tell me how it goes. And the simplicity of it, the assumption that she would be there afterward to tell him, was worth more than any formal expression of confidence would have been. What? The meeting happened in a hotel room in a city that was not her city, which was Roland's choice and also not an accident. He was demonstrating that he could require her to travel, which was a small territorial assertion and the kind of thing he had always done, staked claims through geography, through scheduling, through the 100 small choices that accumulated into a posture of dominance. She noticed it. She didn't react to it. She took the flight. She went to the hotel. She walked into the room with Carla at her back, and her hands visible, and her pulse in the controlled range that took active effort to maintain. Roland Hart was sitting at a table by the window. He was 71 years old, and he looked like what he was, which was a man who had built an empire on the premise that other people's weakness was a natural resource, and who had done so long enough that the enterprise had become entirely invisible to him as an enterprise and was simply his understanding of the world. He was wearing a suit that cost more than most people's monthly income, and he did not stand when she entered, which was the second territorial assertion in 30 seconds. She sat across from him without being asked. He looked at her. She looked at him. The face was familiar in the way that early experience created familiarity, cellular, involuntary, the kind that bypassed analysis and went directly to something older. She had looked at this face across 100 dinner tables, had learned to read it the way you learn to read weather, had spent 22 years using the information it provided to make decisions about her own safety. She read it now and found something she had not expected. Uncertainty, not fear. Roland Hart did not do fear, or if he did, he had spent so long converting it into other things that the original signal was unrecognizable. But uncertainty, the specific uncertainty of a man encountering a version of a situation that his models hadn't predicted. She had been the thing he didn't know how to predict. That was the fear underneath everything. Not Damien Voss and his organization, not Luca's interior intelligence, not the agency investigation that was now in formal progress. Her, the daughter he had designed as a resource, and who had become something his design hadn't intended. You look like your mother, he said. It was an opening move, not a sentiment. I know, she said. You've never meant that as a compliment. Something shifted in his expression. The faintest acknowledgement of a point scored, the kind of acknowledgement he gave when he couldn't reasonably withhold it. You've done significant damage, he said. Yes, she said, more than I anticipated. I know that too. He looked at her. You had help. I had resources, she said. There's a difference. She let a pause settle. You taught me the difference. Resources are tools. Help implies a dependency that can be leveraged. She held his gaze. I have resources. I don't have dependencies. Not the kind you can use. He studied her face with the methodical attention of a man who had spent 50 years reading people and was encountering one he had miscalculated. What do you want? He said. From you? She looked at him calmly. Nothing you can give me. Everyone wants something. I want the version of my life that you decided I wasn't allowed to have, she said. I want the years of it back. I want Luca's years back. I want the years that Vincent Voss didn't get because of an order you gave to solve a real estate problem. She paused. None of those are things you can give me. So from you, in this room, right now, nothing. I'm not here to negotiate. He was very still. Then why are you here? He said. Because you asked, she said, and because I wanted to see if you'd become something I didn't recognize, or if you were still exactly what you always were. She looked at him. You're still exactly what you always were. That's useful to know. He watched her. You've become formidable, he said. The word was measured, almost careful. You made me the thing you were afraid of, she said. You designed me to be useful, and you underestimated the difference between useful and capable. Every skill you built into me was for your purposes. I've been using them for mine. The window behind him showed a city skyline, the late afternoon light on buildings, the ordinary visual vocabulary of a world that continued without regard for the conversations happening inside it. The investigation will not produce what you believe it will produce, he said. His voice had shifted slightly. Still controlled, but underneath the control, something that was beginning to understand its position had changed. It will produce what the documentation produces, she said, and the documentation is Luca's. He knows where you put everything. He knows where the real records are. Not the versions you prepared for scrutiny, but the versions you prepared for your own reference, because you always needed to know the truth of your own accounts, even when no one else could. She paused. He's been reading your private records for 4 years. The stillness that came over Roland Hart's face was the stillness of a man understanding that a wall he believed impenetrable had been walked through without difficulty, from the inside. She watched it happen. She felt nothing she expected to feel. She had anticipated something, satisfaction perhaps, or the specific cold pleasure of a reversal. What she felt instead was closer to exhaustion and closer to grief than either of those, the grief of a person standing across from a man who was her father and recognizing, with complete clarity, that no version of this room would ever give her what a father was supposed to give. She had known that for a long time. This was just the first time she had looked at it directly instead of sideways. This ends for you, she said. Not harshly, factually. The organization ends, the accounts end, the influence ends. It doesn't end because of vengeance. It ends because the structure doesn't work anymore once the interior is exposed, and the interior is exposed. She looked at him. What you do with the time between now and when the formal action moves is your choice. If you cooperate with what's coming, the parameters of what follows are different than if you don't. That's not a threat, and it's not an offer. It's information. Roland Hart looked at his daughter across a hotel table in a city neither of them lived in and said nothing for a very long time. Then, "Your mother would have been proud of you." She looked at him. She did not say what she was thinking, which was that her mother's pride was a currency he had no standing to trade in, that her mother had been the first person his machinery had consumed, that invoking her now was the last available move of a man who had run out of better ones. She said nothing. She stood. She straightened her jacket. She looked at him one final time, the face she had spent 22 years learning to read, the face that had determined the shape of her childhood and the shape of her running and the shape of everything that came after. And she understood that this was the last time she would see it, whether she planned it that way or not, because there was nothing left in it for her to need. "Goodbye," she said. She turned and walked out. Carla fell in behind her. They walked the corridor to the elevator, and the elevator to the lobby, and the lobby to the street. And when they were outside and the city air hit her face, she stopped. She stood still for approximately 10 seconds. Then she took a breath that went all the way to the floor of her lungs. The kind of breath that had room in it, the kind her chest had not had room for in longer than she could pinpoint. And she exhaled, and something went out with the exhaled air that had been living below her sternum since she was younger than she could remember. She called Damien. He picked up on the second ring. "Done," she said. A pause. "Are you all right?" he said. She thought about the question, gave it the time it deserved. "Yes," she said. "I think I actually am." Roland Hart cooperated. Not fully, not without legal compulsion, not without the specific grudging compliance of a man who had calculated that cooperation was less costly than the alternative. But enough. The formal action advanced in 6 weeks, as Reeves had predicted, and the cooperation produced parameters that were not lenient but were defined, which was a different thing. Serrano negotiated his own position separately, through lawyers, in a process that took 2 months and resulted in an outcome that was unsatisfying in the way all negotiated outcomes were unsatisfying. Incomplete, impure, determined more by the available evidence than by any principle of proportional consequence. He had been a participant. He had also been, in specific ways that the documentation supported, a person whose participation had been structured by Roland Hart in ways that limited his actual operational independence. Both of these things were true simultaneously. The legal process produced a result that was a function of both. Luca received the protection he had been promised and used the year following the warehouse to build a life that had been his choice, which was the first such life he had been able to build. He left the city. He sent Evelyn a message every few weeks. Short, specific, the messages of a person establishing a pattern of contact who knew the pattern was new and was treating it with appropriate care. She answered everyone. Margaret Holloway received the apology she was owed delivered in person in a coffee shop that she had chosen at a time she had determined. She accepted it without ceremony and then asked Evelyn what she was planning to do next, which was the kind of question only Margaret would ask in that context, and which was, as it happened, the most useful question anyone had asked her in months. What she was planning to do next turned out to be a thing she had been building toward without naming, the way you sometimes built toward things that your conscious decision-making couldn't access directly. She had been thinking in the margins of the 6-month operation about what she actually knew how to do, not the survival skills, not the running skills, but the analytical capacity she had discovered in herself in the years of studying her father's organization, first from inside and then from outside. The ability to understand how structures worked, how power moved through them, what made them vulnerable, and what made them durable. There were people who needed that understanding and didn't have it. People in positions less resourced than her own, who were navigating institutional and organizational systems that were designed to be opaque, who needed someone who had learned to read opacity for 22 years before figuring out how to dismantle it. She told Damien about it the evening after the coffee with Margaret. They were in the kitchen she had stopped calculating exits from. The kitchen where she had learned that he made coffee with the impatient energy of a man who considered waiting for the machine to finish an unreasonable constraint on his schedule. He listened to all of it. "It's not inside any structure I can offer you," she said. "It's not organizational work. It would involve working with people who have very little, which is a different context than the one we've been operating in." "I know that," he said. "It might look impractical." "It looks like you," he said. She looked at him. "It's what you're good at," he said. "Reading systems from the inside. You spent your whole life learning to do it. The fact that you'd apply it somewhere other than criminal infrastructure doesn't make it impractical." A pause. "It makes it the right use of what it cost you to learn it." She thought about that for a long time. Then she said, "I need to tell you something else." He waited. Patient in the way he was patient, fully, without performance. "I understand now why I couldn't say it before," she said. "I couldn't say it when I was 22 because I was afraid of what it would cost. I couldn't say it for 5 years because I'd made a choice that seemed to make saying it impossible. I couldn't say it last night in the medical room because there was too much else and I needed to get the too much else out of the way first." She held his gaze. "I'm saying it now because the too much else is out of the way and this is what's left, and what's left is simple." He looked at her. "I love you," she said. "I've loved you since before I had the vocabulary for what I was feeling. I loved you when I left, and I loved you while I was running, and I love you right now in this kitchen at... She glanced at the window, the evening light. 7:15 on a Tuesday. She paused. That's all. That's the whole thing. He was very still for a moment. Then he crossed the kitchen, 2 steps, 3, unhurried but not slow. And he stood in front of her and put his hand against the side of her face, the right hand, the one that worked, and she leaned into it the way you leaned into something you'd been standing without for a long time and had stopped expecting to feel. I know, he said, quietly. I've known since a conference room yesterday morning. A pause. I should have known 5 years ago. We both should have known a lot of things 5 years ago, she said. Yes, he said. We should have. He looked at her. I love you. I have loved you in the specific, inconvenient 5 years of pretending I hadn't way that is apparently the only way available to me. Something moved in his expression, the unguarded version of his face, the one she had been learning. I would like to stop pretending I hadn't, as a long-term plan. She looked at him. That's a good plan, she said. I have good plans occasionally, he said. You have good plans constantly, she said. You have bad moments and good plans. That's your specific configuration. And yours? She thought about it. Good instincts and bad patience, she said. I think we're probably complementary. He looked at her for a moment, and then he smiled. Not the controlled quarter smile she had catalogued before. Not the managed acknowledgement, but something full and slightly startled, the smile of a person surprised into it. And it was the most specific and particular thing she had ever seen on his face, and she intended to remember it for the rest of her life. She put her hand over his. Outside, the city held its ordinary evening, the light going amber and then gray, the streets doing what streets did, the world cycling through its continuous motion without marking this particular kitchen. These particular 2 people, this particular moment of 2 damaged and specific humans deciding, with full awareness of what it had cost to get there, that they were not going to run from it anymore. The contract that had begun it was dissolved. The family that had shaped it was dismantled. The years spent in the wrong direction were behind them and unretrievable, which was the true nature of years. You could not get them back. You could only decide what to do with the ones that came after. They had ones that came after. Several months later, in a room smaller and quieter than any room a ceremony might have required, with Luca present via a screen from a city that was beginning to feel like his own, and Reeves standing slightly too close to the door out of professional habit, and Margaret Holloway making a face at him about it from across the room, Damien Voss asked Evelyn Hart a question that had no operational component and no strategic function and served no purpose that could be measured in any of the terms he had spent his adult life measuring things in. She said yes. She said it without hesitation, without calculation, without the internal surveying of exits and contingencies and the cost of staying. She said it because she was not running, had not been running for months, had dismantled the last of the infrastructure of running piece by piece until what was left was a woman standing in a room who knew exactly where she was and had chosen to be exactly there. They walked out into the morning light together. No arrangements to make, no machinery to dismantle, no name to maintain that wasn't her own. Just the street ahead, just the light on it. Just the particular quality of a morning that belonged entirely to the people walking through it. For the first time in 5 years, neither of them was looking for the exit. They had, at last, arrived somewhere they intended to stay.